How's it going? Welcome to No Fun Allowed, and today I'm going to be going over all the hot takes that you all sent me. I'm sure that all of them are going to be level-headed and kind, and I'm totally going to agree with all of them. First up, hot take, wizards need nerfs. Hotter take, wizards are perfectly balanced for an adventuring day with 6 to 8 encounters in a day. The thing to consider is 5e was built around the idea that you're getting into a lot of encounters in a day, but of course nobody runs it like that. So yes, if you're running a single encounter a day at, let's say, 5th level, where the wizard can cast Fireball and do 8d6 points of damage to multiple targets, versus the poor fighter, who at best is only doing 4d6 points of damage to a single target, then yes, of course the wizards literally blow the fighter out the water. The thing to consider is, you need to run a game that facilitates an enjoyable experience for all classes, or you just nerf and buff everything. D&D sucks in anything non-combat related. Hey, I'm actually going to have to agree with that one. You all could tell me how combat works. You all could tell me how initiative works. You all could tell me the actions you can perform, the dodge and the help, and your features and your abilities and your stuff. You can do combat. But can you tell me the systems for roleplay, specifically social encounters? Can you tell me those game mechanics? Probably not. Can you tell me the exact rules on movement, specifically exploration, in regards of moving around the dungeon, moving around the wilderness, all those things? I'm willing to bet you that you couldn't. There is clearly a game philosophy design in 5e that it is purely combat related, because all of the features and all of the traits and all of the spells and almost everything in the game is related to combat. So 5e is a combat related game, and unfortunately because they spend so much time, money, and effort on the combat, they totally forgot the exploration and roleplay side of things. Tired of seeing crossbow expert sharpshooter builds. I'm tired of seeing builds in general. That's my hot take. I genuinely don't like builds. My philosophy on that is, the more people spend thinking about the character sheet, they spend less time thinking about the character. The more time people think about the future of, oh, at this level my character's going to get this thing and it's going to do this so I can do this one thing really well, the less time you're invested in the game. The less time you're invested with the DM story that they're presenting, the less time you're present at the adventure at hand, and also very importantly is the less time you're thinking about the other players at the table. More often than not, a lot of these people that build these build the builds for them. But very few times do I see people build a build where the build actually facilitates a fun environment for everyone at the table. Does your build optimize in damage dealing? Does your build optimize in this one specific scenario? Or does your character actually be present at the adventure for everyone involved, and everyone's going to say, oh man, that's a great character to be involved with? Or do they say, oh, that's a good character sheet? Playing just core is fun and can lead to endless hours of adventure. Humans aren't boring, you're boring. Hey, one thing I will always say is, always run a game purely as written at first, and then start muddling around with it, start homebrewing whatever it is that you need to. Because yes, core D&D is great, but the thing is, core D&D is specifically a general overview of what the game can be. Of course, run things purely as written to see how it goes. See what things you like and see what things you don't like. The core gameplay is perfectly fine for a lot of people, but of course there's a lot of people that sit there and say, oh, you know what, instead of this little mechanic, how about we replace it with another mechanic? The thing to consider is, with 5e, it was so generalized that yeah, it's going to attract a lot more people, much like Skyrim, but unfortunately it's also going to mean that there's a lot of people who want something a bit different. Hot takes are cliche and meaningless. Give me an opinion you'll die on a hill for. Here's my, I guess, opinion, is that D&D is not the greatest tabletop role-playing game system around. There, I said it. 5e is great at what it does, but it can't do everything. I know a lot of people want to move the system into an area where it can do everything. They want it to do horror, they want it to do mystery, they want it to do high action, they want to do low fantasy, they want to do all these things. But I'm here to tell you, 5e does what it does well. It does the high action octane pulp adventure with high fantasy and a whole bunch of crazy nonsense, but it doesn't do a whole bunch of other things well. unless you're willing to just absolutely just strip it down to the bare necessities. But at that point, it would be much, much better to play a different role-playing game system that actually makes the game more enjoyable. A lot of times people are trying to push 5e into a direction which I simply think that it shouldn't be pushed in. Other game systems do other things better, and that's fine. It's good to recognize what the game system's strengths are and what its weaknesses are. Play to its strengths, but don't play into its weaknesses. Every class can use magic. I hate that. Well, I'm pretty much on the same boat there. The thing about magic is, I want magic to truly be magical. I want it to be undescribable. I want it to be unexplainable. I want it to feel special. But guess what? If everyone gets it, it's no longer special, right? If the fighter can cast the magic, and the barbarian can cast the magic, and so many other classes get access to magic, then I truly do think that magic no longer becomes magical. I think magical becomes a codified thing, which I don't think magic is supposed to be. I think magic is supposed to be a rare thing. I think it's supposed to be a fantastical thing. And the more it's used, the less special that it is. So every class having magic and using magic regularly, I think is kind of boring. I think that there should be a lot more nuance to magic, and I think magic should be truly special. Followers, hireling, henchmen, and sidekicks, etc., are indistinguishable from DMPCs, but only one of those names comes with a negative connotation. I think the trick with that is, a DMPC is someone that's clearly inserted into the party, and the DM's taking charge, and they are just inserting themselves into an adventure when quite frankly they shouldn't. But the real trick, I think, with followers, hireling, henchmen, sidekicks, etc., is those are people that are waiting to be called on by the PCs. If you just have the PCs have a whole little flock of followers behind them, and they are completely silent until the player says something, then I think it's perfectly fine. Also, if you give your players their character sheets, if you don't touch their character sheets at all in regards of anything, you just give them to the players, and the players handle all of the minutia of rolling for morale and for attacking and for whatever else, then I think it's perfectly fine. Wizards should get meta magic while sorcerers get arcane recovery. So the flip here is that in this scenario, the wizard is the one that's able to bend their spells because they're the ones that actually truly trained to use magic, versus the sorcerer is the one that just simply gets access to a whole bunch of magic because they were born with it. I think that's perfectly fine. I think that actually fits really well. And as you mentioned in this comment, yes, if you just flip those two abilities, then of course the sorcerer is going to get left high and dry. So you would have to change some things around. But I totally agree that the person that spends their entire life, maybe, learning all of these spells, they should be able to manipulate the spells in some fancier way, which is somewhat reflected in the wizard subclass, because the subclass does allow you to do several other things. But I see what you're getting at here. The sorcerer does feel a little bit weird with their meta magics in that you basically get to pick the same several ones and you get to manipulate this very small list of spells. And yeah, I think that there could be a lot more nuance to that, and I certainly will be working on that when I do a rework of all of the classes. Honestly, the main thing that bugs me about 5e is people complaining about 5e. Here's the thing to consider. With all fandoms, there's a percentage of the people that are going to complain. So when you have a small fan base, then it's incredibly tiny the amount of people that are going to complain about it. But the larger something gets, the more people are going to complain. We see this with Star Wars, for example. Star Wars is one of the biggest fandoms of all time. It's got hundreds of millions of people that love it. So guess what? There are tons and tons of people that complain about it. We see that with Game of Thrones. We see that with everything else, right? Wizards of the Coast has stated that they believe that 40 million people are actively playing 5e. So if you take the fact that there are 40 million people actively playing 5e, then it makes sense that there's going to be a lot of people complaining about it. People love to complain, but something to consider is typically people only complain about the things that they care about. They want to see D&D improve, and them complaining in some way, maybe not the most correct way, but in a way is trying to help improve the game. Hunter's Mark is a terrible spell. I see someone's been watching too much Pack Tactics recently. The thing to consider is when you have the vast amount of spells that are in 5e, at this point there's over 500 spells, inevitably some are going to be better and some are going to be worse. Hunter's Mark is a terrible spell for a number of reasons. Because you feel like you have to use it, because it doesn't have the versatility, because it's not as good as the other spells, because of this, because of that. But quite frankly, it's impossible to balance the hundreds and hundreds of spells that exist in 5e. It's just not going to happen. Get over it. It's just not going to work out. I understand why Hunter's Mark is a terrible spell for so many different reasons in regards to the damage it puts out and because of all the other various implications. But I think it's important to recognize that there are so many spells out there that if you truly do think Hunter's Mark is a terrible spell, you can either pick something else or you can try and level the playing field. Although try is the important word there. Hot take, railroading players is just fine if done while also listening to them. Abso-freaking-lutely. Railroading has a negative connotation in our games because that implies that we are steering our players in the direction that we want to go and they don't get any choice in the matter. I disagree. I am going to be putting out a video on railroading, sandboxing, and roller coastering the game. I think railroading is perfectly fine, especially if your players sign up for that game. I ask my players all the time, hey, do you want a truly open sandbox? Do you want a railroad? Do you want a roller coaster style adventure? What do you want? And a lot of times people want a railroaded adventure. A lot of times people want to go in a forward direction with some gutters along the side. Moving forward in a continuous pattern is a great way to go about running an adventure and ensuring that every single session your players are at least making some progress, and of course you're maximizing your prep. If you run a sandbox game where you have to prep a ton of things because your players can go anywhere and do anything, that sounds miserable to a lot of people. I personally have ran so many different games so many different ways, but I promise you the majority of the people that I've ran for actually do prefer a railroaded style of game. Randomness of dice rolling is terrible for telling stories, and dice could, for the most part, be done with entirely. I completely disagree with that. The randomness is what makes the telling of stories great, because I don't want to sit there and have a script ready for what's going to happen in the game. I want to show up and, whether I'm a player or a DM, not know how the story is going to go. And that's what the dice are for. Am I going to go and beat up that big bad villain, or are we going to get our butts kicked? Are we going to get a big discount on sales, or are we going to get kicked out of town because we accidentally insulted the mayor? I love the randomness of the game because without any sort of randomness involved, then it is just a collaborative story game, and there's plenty of other game systems that actually cater to that. I don't want D&D to become just a collaborative storytelling game with no dice involved, because the dice are, for me, what makes the game truly what it is. And lastly here, preparing spells is too confusing. Make all classes have the same spell choosing mechanic. Still give different spells and slots. Hard to teach a table of new players how to manage spells when each class is different. There is this perpetuating myth in the community that 5e D&D is a good system for new players. This is a blatant lie that just gets shoved around because people want to push their own game system. 5e is not a good system for new players. Look at this character sheet. It's freaking expansive. It's large. It's huge. Look how many classes there are. Look how many subclasses there are. Look how many features and traits and spells and abilities. There is way too many things. 5e is not a good system for new players. I'm here to tell you that. This book that I have right here, the Haunted Omnibus, that actually has a whole bunch of game systems that are anywhere between 1 to 3 pages. And those are actually good systems for new players. Getting involved with simple game mechanics, simple dice, and working your way up to 5th edition, I believe, is the right way to go. Because 5e is just pushing players into the deep end. Obviously, there is some game systems that are much more complicated, yes. But 5e is very, very complicated. And if you don't think it's complicated, that's because you're either super duper wrinkle brain, or you totally forgot the learning process. Now, in regards of making the classes have the same mechanic on choosing their spells, I once again think that would detract away from the different classes. I want each class to be extremely unique. I want each class to make it feel like it truly matters. And the more you make every single class the same, the less magical each one becomes, specifically with the spellcasters. If everyone's drawing forth from the same sort of style on how their magic works, then once again, magic doesn't feel magical to me. I like that different spellcasting classes have different mechanics on how many spells they can prepare and what spell slots they have and what spells they have access to. The more diverse they are, the better. Alrighty, that was just a few of the hot takes that I saw coming from all y'all. That was actually awesome. I got a ton of comments, so thank you all for that. And I can't wait to see what more you guys all have to talk with me about, because there is a lot of things in our hobby that should be discussed, and I'm willing to discuss those things. In addition to discussing all the topics that you all present to me, I'm also presenting my own with No Fun's Guide to Everything, a monthly magazine that is filled with a whole bunch of new spells, traits, features, abilities, game systems, and adventures, all for you all. You can find that on my Patreon. For just $5 a month, you get access to a whole magazine. What a steal. So what do you all think about my reactions to these hot takes? Do you agree with them? Do you disagree with them? Do you have even more spicier hot takes? Go ahead and tell me those things down below. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you for watching. Thanks for listening. And thank you to my amazing patrons. You guys are absolutely incredible. Thank you so very much. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one. You know, looking through all these comments, I didn't get anything terribly spicy, but that's probably for the best, because let me tell you what, I've gotten some pretty spicy comments on my channel before, and those are definitely not worth sharing on the channel.